Sukuna was known as the strongest sorcerer to ever exist, a monster who ruled over others for countless years, feared even after death. To this day, fans still argue endlessly. Was Gojo stronger, or was Sukuna truly unmatched? But that debate isn't what we're here for today. Because the most shocking moment in Jujutsu Kaisen wasn't just Sukuna's reign of terror, it was the fact that he was defeated, and the one standing at the center of that moment was none other than Yuji Itadori. But here's the truth most people ignore. Sukuna didn't fall to Yuji alone. It took the combined effort of nearly the entire Jujutsu world to bring him down, and even then, this wasn't Sukuna at his absolute peak. We never saw him fight in his true Heian Era form, the version of Sukuna that once dominated the world without mercy. So, in many ways, that battle was never truly fair. Before we start, if you enjoy deep Jujutsu Kaisen breakdowns like this, make sure to subscribe. We're getting closer to 1,000, and your support really helps. Now fast forward. In JJK Modulo, we finally see Adult Yuji, a version of him that is calmer, deadlier, and far more terrifying than before. And that's where the real question begins. What if Adult Yuji faced Heian Era Sukuna? 1 versus 1. No interference, no nerfs, no excuses. Who would actually win? That's exactly what we're breaking down today. So, let's get into the video. To truly decide who would win this fight, we first have to do one thing properly: establish the power levels. Because without that, any comparison between Adult Yuji and Sukuna becomes meaningless. So before we even mention Yuji again, we have to start with the strongest version of his opponent, Heian Era Sukuna, at full potential. Now, a lot of fans believe that the Sukuna we saw during the Shinjuku Showdown was already his Heian Era form, and technically, they're not entirely wrong. Sukuna did regain his original appearance, he did regain 4 arms, and he did regain a large portion of his former power. But here's the crucial detail that changes everything. Sukuna was still an incarnated sorcerer. He wasn't fighting in a body that was originally his. He was inhabiting Megumi Fushiguro. And the goal of the sorcerers wasn't to erase Sukuna from existence. It was to separate him from Megumi. That means Sukuna was fighting under a completely different condition. Killing Sukuna in his own body, where his soul, cursed energy flow, and physical form are perfectly aligned, is a very different challenge than defeating him while he's bound to a vessel. So when we talk about true Heian Era Sukuna, we're talking about a version with no compatibility issues, no internal resistance, and no limits imposed by another person's body. With that clarified, let's finally break down what Sukuna was truly capable of. Back in the golden age of Jujutsu, the Heian Era, Ryomen Sukuna wasn't just feared, he was regarded with awe. This was a time when sorcerers were far more brutal, far more experienced, and far less forgiving than modern Jujutsu society. And even in that era, Sukuna stood above everyone. Thousands of sorcerers challenged him, not amateurs, not rookies. These were fighters who had trained their entire lives specifically to kill him, and they still fell. One of Sukuna's most infamous feats was single-handedly slaughtering the Sun, Moon, and Star Squad, along with the 5 empty generals, the most elite military force of the Fujiwara clan. These weren't just strong sorcerers, they were considered unstoppable, and Sukuna erased them alone. The impact of this massacre was so devastating that the authorities of Japan realized a terrifying truth. They could not defeat him. So instead of opposing Sukuna, they chose to appease him. Festivals were held in his honor. That alone tells you everything about the level of fear he inspired. This is how Sukuna earned the titles the King of Curses and the strongest sorcerer in history. And these titles weren't exaggerations. Even in the modern era, Satoru Gojo, a man whose confidence borders on arrogance, openly acknowledged Sukuna's strength. Gojo didn't say he would easily win. He said the fight would be difficult. That alone places Sukuna in a category almost no one reaches. But Sukuna's power doesn't come from cursed techniques alone. He possesses an absurd amount of cursed energy, but more importantly, his control over it is near perfect. He doesn't waste energy, he doesn't panic, and he understands Jujutsu on a level that feels almost instinctual. On top of that, Sukuna's physical abilities are terrifying. Strength, speed, durability. He can dominate opponents without even revealing his true techniques. He has been shown overwhelming enemies using only raw combat ability, treating high-level sorcerers like toys. Now let's talk about the abilities most people recognize. Sukuna's slashing techniques, dismantle and cleave, are far more dangerous than they appear. These aren't simple attacks, they adapt. Cleave adjusts based on the target's cursed energy and durability, meaning defense alone is never enough. If you're strong, the attack becomes stronger. If you reinforce your body, the slash compensates. And on top of that, Sukuna has demonstrated control over flames, using fire-based attacks for devastating long-range destruction. All of this becomes even more terrifying when paired with Malevolent Shrine, a domain expansion that doesn't trap you inside a barrier. It forces the environment itself to become part of Sukuna's technique. There is no escape. There is no safe zone. You are simply inside his territory. And yet, even with all of this, there's still one thing about Sukuna that remains mysterious, especially for anime-only viewers: his true innate technique. In Jujutsu Kaisen, a sorcerer's entire fighting style revolves around their innate ability. And considering how dominant Sukuna was even without fully revealing it, it's terrifying to imagine what his complete kit looks like when fully unleashed. This is why Sukuna never felt like someone fighting seriously. It always felt like he was holding something back. So when we talk about Heian Era Sukuna at full power, we're not talking about just another villain. We're talking about a being who dominated an entire era, warped history itself, and forced the world to bow rather than resist. And this is the opponent Adult Yuji would have to face. Now, let's talk about Prime Itadori Yuji. Prime Adult Itadori Yuji, the monster that outgrew the era. To truly understand how strong Prime Adult Itadori Yuji is, we need to start with one simple fact. Yuji's greatest weapon was never a single technique. It was his growth rate. Yuji Itadori became a Jujutsu sorcerer at just 15 years old. No clan, no inherited training, no years of preparation. And yet, in less than 6 months, he rose to a level where he could trade blows with special grades, damage Raimen, Sukuna, awaken multiple high-tier techniques mid-battle, and survive fights that should have instantly killed him. This alone already places Yuji among the most gifted prodigies in Jujutsu history. But when we talk about Prime Adult Yuji, we're talking about what happens when that absurd potential is given time. Yuji is not a normal human. Because of his unique birth and the consumption of the death paintings, Yuji possesses a hybrid physiology that fundamentally changes how his body interacts with cursed energy. This grants him several broken advantages. First, Yuji can convert cursed energy directly into blood. Unlike traditional blood manipulation users, he doesn't suffer from blood loss, stamina drain, or self-destruction over time. Second, this physiology allows him to use reverse curse technique far more efficiently than normal sorcerers. Reattaching limbs, healing fatal injuries, and restoring his body mid-combat becomes cheaper and faster. As an adult, Yuji's regeneration would rival, and potentially surpass, even top-tier RCT users. In long battles, this alone makes him nearly impossible to wear down. Blood manipulation, a top-tier technique, finally at full potential. Blood manipulation has always been stated to be one of the great cursed techniques in Jujutsu history. On paper, it stands alongside Limitless with the 6 eyes, 10 shadows. The only reason it never dominated the verse is simple. No one ever reached its ceiling. Now that we understand both power levels, we can finally talk about how this fight would actually play out. But before jumping straight into the battle itself, there's something extremely important we need to acknowledge. We actually have limited information on both fighters. Heian Era Sukuna exists mostly through history, statements, and fragments of his power. And Adult Yuji, we're only 17 chapters into JJK Modulo, and that means everything we're discussing here is based on the current information available. As the story continues, the result of this fight could completely change. So, with what we know right now, let's break down how this matchup would realistically unfold. First, let's talk about overlapping abilities. Both Sukuna and Yuji possess techniques tied to slashing and shrine-based powers. Because of that, these abilities mostly cancel each other out in terms of advantage. Neither side gains a decisive edge here. Where Sukuna starts pulling ahead is with Fuga, his fire-based technique. This gives Sukuna a major advantage in range and area destruction, forcing Yuji to constantly stay on the move. However, Adult Yuji isn't defenseless here. With blood manipulation, Yuji gains both offensive flexibility and defensive options, allowing him to counter, reinforce, and adapt mid-fight. So while Sukuna's fire gives him control, it doesn't decide the battle on its own. Now, let's talk about physical combat. This is where adult Yuji shines the most. Even at just 17 years old, Yuji managed to land 8 black flashes on Sukuna in a single chapter. That alone is insane. Black Flash requires perfect cursed energy timing, something even veteran sorcerers struggle with. If teenage Yuji could do that, then adult Yuji in close combat is a nightmare. In pure hand-to-hand combat, Yuji holds the advantage. Overpowering him physically would be nearly impossible even for Sukuna, but this fight doesn't end with punches, because the real deciding factor comes down to domains. Sukuna's malevolent shrine is widely considered the strongest domain in all of Jujutsu Kaisen. It doesn't trap you, it doesn't give you an escape condition, it simply turns the surrounding space into a killing field. Adult Yuji does possess his own domain, but when we're talking about Heian Era Sukuna, it's hard to argue that Yuji's domain could overpower his. In a domain clash, Sukuna holds the advantage, and that's ultimately what decides this fight. Looking at everything together, techniques, adaptability, physical strength, and domain control, this battle would be extremely close. There is no easy winner here, but with the information we have right now, the edge goes to Heian Era Sukuna. Not by a massive gap, not by domination, but by experience, domain supremacy, and versatility. That said, this verdict is not permanent. As JJK Modulo continues and we learn more about adult Yuji's true limits, this entire scenario could flip on its head. So for now, Heian Era Sukuna wins, but the future might tell a very different story. Let me know in the comments who you think would win and why. I'll try to reply to every single comment, and if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe. We're close to our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Thanks for watching. Love you all.